Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to introduce Charlene. Charlene Stevens earned a BA in art history at UCLA before studying art education and photography at CSULA and film and photographic studies at the University of Leiden. Upon her return to the United States, Ms. Stevens founded a digital art publication, Arcade Project, in 2016. Last year, she launched a nomadic contemporary art gallery, Arcade Project Curatorial, during the height of the pandemic. Ms. Stevens is a contributor at hyperallergic.com, Foam magazine, and the Art newspaper. Ms. Stevens lives and works in New York. Charlene.
Hey, thank you, Esmé. And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the curator artist talk for The New Flesh. And I am pleased to introduce the artists. We're going to go in alphabetical order. We're going to start with Phillip Birch. He lives and works in New York. His work utilizes animation, sculpture, and video games. Focusing on technology and history, Birch's work traces a possible trajectory of human development and calls into question the linearity of progress. His work and research explores topics such as disability theory, autoimmune disease, body horror, Catholicism, schizophrenia, and game theory. Birch has had recent exhibitions, performances, and screening at Reyes Finn, Detroit, Jack Hanley, New York, Sculpture Center, New York, Joan, Los Angeles, 47 Canal, New York, Essex Flowers in New York, The Loft, Survey Family Foundation, Brussels, and MUMOK Vienna. He has given lectures at Yale University and Parsons School of Design. His work is in the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art. Claudia Hart emerged as part of a generation as 90s intermedia artists examining issues of identity and representation. Since the late 90s, she began working with 3D animation. Hart embraced these same concepts, but now focuses on the impact of computing and simulation technologies. She was an early adopter of virtual imaging using 3D animation to make media installations and projections. And later, as they were invented, other forms of VR, AR, and objects were produced by computer-driven production machines. At the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she is a professor, she developed a pedagogic program based on her practice, Experimental 3D, the first dedicated solely to teaching simulations technologies in an art school context. Hart's works are widely exhibited and collected by galleries and museums, including the collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Modern Art, and in addition, her work has been shown at the new museum produced at the I-Beam Center for Art and Technology, where she was an honorary fellow in 2013 through 14 at Pioneer Works, New York, where she was a technology resident in 2018, and the Center for New Music and Audio Technology at UC Berkeley, where she has collaborated with its director, the composer Edmund Campion, and been a resident for the past 5 years. She lives and works in New York, is represented in the US by Bitforms Gallery, and is married to the media artist Kurt Henschlager. Auriea Harvey is an artist producing simulations and sculptures that bridge physical and digital space. After plumbing the depths of net art and video games, she has now turned her attention to digital sculpture, 3D printing, and mixed reality. The work is presented as sculptures that blend digital and handmade production. Harvey is half of the artist duo Entropy 8 Zuper Tale of Tales, Song of Songs, known for their pioneering works in internet art, video games, and XR. Harvey's works can be found in the permanent collections of the Walker Art Center, San Francisco Museum of Art, Rhizome's Net Art Anthology, and the Lot 555 NFT collection. Her video games and VR works have had international success, including exhibitions at the Tinguely Museum, I know I pronounced that wrong, Basel, the Victoria and Albert Museum, London, the New Museum, New York, and ZKM, Karlsruhe. Harvey is the recipient of the Creative Capital Grant and the winner of the Independent Games Festival Novo Award. She is represented by Bitforms Gallery NYC. Sophie Kahn is a digital artist and sculptor whose work addresses technology's failure to capture the unstable human body. She grew up in Melbourne, Australia, and now lives and works in Brooklyn. She studied at Goldsmiths and the School of Art Institute of Chicago. She taught at Pratt Institute and has recently completed residencies at Pioneer Works and the Elizabeth Foundation. She is a NIFA Digital and Electronic Arts Fellow. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for this talk. And also thank you very much for participating in this exhibition. So when I came across the new flesh, when I came up with the idea, really the overarching theme is posthumanism. And the Oxford English Dictionary defines that, but it does it with a disclaimer in science fiction, but which I believe translates to science and art as well as science fiction. The idea that humanity can be transformed, transcended, or eliminated either by technological advances or the evolutionary process, artistic, scientific, or philosophical practice which reflects this belief. And we'll go to the next slide. And Catherine Hales, in her book, How We Became Posthuman, and this is the quote that begins the statement and the press release. In contrast to the body, embodiment is contextual, enmeshed within the specifics of place, time, physiology, and culture, which together compose enactment. Embodiment never coincides exactly with the body, however that normalized concept is understood. Chloe? And I wanted to begin with Birch's work, and also just how does this fit into, how does your practice, how does posthumanism relate to your practice? And I'm going to go through, and we can go through all of the artists in alphabetical order, with this. So let's start with Phillip. Phillip, Esmé, can we go to the first? Go to Phillip's first slide, and I'm going to give the mic to you.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Charlene. So yeah, Phillip Birch. So this is an older work of mine. It's from 2016. It's drawing a lot from fan fiction. There's a dialogue in there where, it's sort of, I'm always really interested in, I'm interested in sort of internet fan fiction, especially lately the Omegaverse, if you're familiar. It's pretty amazing and interesting. But beyond that, this is, it's drawing from images of, from David Cronenberg's movie Existence. But it's sort of postulating this near future world in which people are communicating, sort of telepresencing. I was sort of excited to show this work right now because of the fact that we've all lived through this year of telepresence and what it means to have a body. My sort of interest in posthumanism is really through a specific lens of ableism and disability theory. It's something I deal with in my own life and familially have dealt with my entire life. And I'm really interested in other bodies, other positions, how technology could potentially liberate the disabled body, but then how it's more often through, I don't know, if there's not through neoliberalism or capitalism. I think we've seen this past year in which all of the things that the disabled community have been asking for a very long time. When enough bodies are put into danger, that can be mobilized, and we can automatically make all these exceptions and make a pipeline in which people are able to work from home, educate themselves from home, and we have, we have the technological infrastructure for that. But obviously, there's a sort of balance or hierarchy in which we don't care about these other bodies. So this work is sort of drawing from a lot of my own interest in that, and sort of positioning or considering how in this sort of, even though we don't quote unquote need a body in this world, we'll still bring in a lot of the baggage and apparatus of capitalism with us, and just like hierarchies will always, social hierarchies will continue to manifest themselves, which we sort of see. Marx talked a lot about how technology was going to, help the worker seize the means of production. And obviously, as we're, the current world we're living at and the rise of the technocrats, it's been sort of the exact opposite of that. So that's what this work is sort of dealing with. And sorry, I'm sort of going all over the place, but is specifically dealing with about how those same processes, which we're also sort of seeing with the rise of NFTs, right? About how we're there's digital art, and instead of a wider distribution platform, we are seeing these sort of same mechanisms of ownership and capitalism and elitism brought into it. So anyway, this work predates NFTs, but all of that sort of structure is within it. So I don't know if that's long enough you wanted me to talk, Charlene, about it, but that's sort of the general ideas behind my interest in posthumanism, but then also sort of specifically what this work is dealing with.
And also, I wanted to ask you about, we were talking, a lot of this is influenced by the work of David Cronenberg, the title of the exhibition, and, was from Videodrome, Long Live the New Flesh. And, the game pod from After the Flesh, is modeled on the Existence game pod. And we were talking before about Cronenberg and body horror, and how does that fit in? How does that influence your work?
Yeah, so I mean, body horror is something I'm specifically have been, I guess, always really interested in. My mother suffered from multiple sclerosis, so watching her over the course of my life slowly lose control of their body and isolate themselves, and like, well, forced isolation, is a lot of my, and as like, you know, disability is the one sort of status, or, minority status that everyone in the whole world is sort of moving towards. Just some people accelerated towards it at, sort of different levels. So that's that. And the title of the work, actually, even more stupidly than Cronenberg, actually comes from, there's like a disco goth band called My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, and they have a song called After the Flesh. So that's specifically the title of it is, from that. And I just have always been really drawn to, again, coming to body horror. So like in this work, the HDMI cords are actually embedded in this sort of silicone umbilical tubing that's connecting to the pod. So I wanted them to actually, to all the portions, and the media players are hidden inside of the pod. So all of it's very sort of quote unquote functional in its, abjectness. So that's what that's what I really take from Cronenberg more than anything, is sort of this like, abject beauty. And so that's my sort of like interest in Cronenberg, and that also imagining this sort of bio-future, and how would we connect to, how would we connect to each other over these long distances. And, but yeah.
And yeah, it does resonate with the Zoom era, because, we have these talking heads, which we currently are right now. And we have been for the last year and a half, pretty much been talking heads at work, with our families and everything and friends. And we have a couple of other images, and we also have so there's also a sculpture exiting neuromorphic space, low soul. And could you just give us a little setup for this and for the video clip about low soul and how?
Yeah, so like, so soul is my, like, I was also raised very, very Catholic, which I feel like my interest in uh, post-humanism was more of an inevitability than anything between, sort of uh, the, Catholicisms, like sort of the mysticism slash temporality of the body and moving towards something other, something greater than yourself, but then also seeing, this loved one's body collapse. And so it sort of makes this sort of network sense as to why I would be interested in other possibilities. But then, so what would this currency in, what I call, this new internet, which I just funnily called neuromorphic space, be? And so in it, maybe it's soul. And so, that's just sort of this capital. And so this, the sculpture is like, I do a lot of 3D printing, but I never really leave it just as 3D prints. I'm almost always transforming them. So this was a 3D print that I then took, created a mold from, and then cast it into silicone. And there's like a nice, I like that sort of like stepping, taking one step away from just 3D printing. Often I'm actually doing work to them to make the sculptures not look 3D printed at all, but this is sort of just a space in between. And I'm always trying to figure out how to make sculptures based off of my video work or my video games. So that's that.
Okay, and let's play a clip before before we go to the next little clip of the video.
Cause one is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. One is the loneliest number, whoa, worse than two. It's just no good anymore since you went away. Now I spend my time making rhymes of yesterday. One is the loneliest number. One is the loneliest number. One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do.
Charlene, you're muted.
Okay, so thank you, Philip. And so yeah, that's a preview of the video that's in the installation of After the Flesh. And let's move on to Claudia Hart's work. You have Kryptonite Mortification 1. And I know there's a whole process with this. And I'd love to hear about it and about this series.
Okay. Hi. Hi, Charlene.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. So when I'm going to tell the story of this because it starts my work generally. I keep remaking things. If it's it over and over again as the technology changes. If the thing still exists, I reinvent it. And this is also what happened with this piece, which is sort of interesting because so if you work with new media, you basically don't sell your work, Philip, until NFTs came along. So it's hard for me to think it's totally awful. But anyway, so I have a tendency to take pieces and keep remaking them. So the question is it a new piece or what's happened with it? This one, I've I kept the original concept, which I'm going to tell you. But may I add, this piece fell on the floor and got damaged. And Charlene called me earlier and said, oh my God, it got damaged. And I was like, oh, great, there's insurance. I can remake it now. So Charlene, that's like part of my process. It's like, oh, I can put gold in the hole. I always wanted to do that. So anyway, this started as a pure, I made this piece initially in 2007 because at the Art Institute, my school, they had a, do you want to show the plastic version? Do you have it on your presentation, Charlene? Pure plastic?
Oh, the other mortifications?
Yeah, the one, just like any old one that's pure plastic. I think we even have a picture of this pure plastic. So at my school, they had this 3D printer. And what I was doing with my work generally was trying to resist the technology or the presets, the predetermined software presets and the aesthetics that are imposed by commercial software companies, which was very different from the, I'm actually about to turn 66, so I look sort of young in this Zoom, but that's because of the Zoom facelift filter. But anyway, so as opposed to my colleagues, people of my own age who were exploring this early, they embraced the Google and Apple aesthetic. So mostly what you saw was artworks made by media artists that looked like design or interface design or a certain kind of modernist aesthetic. And I always felt oppressed by pre-existing structures. And so I wanted to resist that. So I was trying to deal always with art, the aesthetics of technology art, to try to make it deal with natural forms, to make it look like nature. Charlene, there's a big modernist square on top of my thing.
That too. There was a big.
It looks like graphic design. Get rid of that.
Would you like to share my screen, because I have the other mortifications.
Oh, okay. Wait.
Okay.
I'm still sharing your screen.
If I make you host, will the video recording stop though?
Is there video?
You enable the screen sharing for me.
Oh yeah, you have to give her screen share rights, Esmé, which you should be able to do. All right, I'll keep talking anyway.
Okay.
As a person who teaches technology, I know that it never works and displays always don't work. So I will say it was plastic. And so I was always trying to resist the aesthetic and make something look like nature, make something look irregular, because those are good. That was like, if you go up to the two colored ones. Yeah. So that was actually the piece. It's the white one. So you might as well do the two color. Yeah, stop. So this was a series. I did them in 2007. And this is, this is a machine that is used to make industrial engineers, designers, to make like ball bearings or screws or parts to a machine. So as my project was to humanize, to deal with issues of irregularity, because in real life there is no perfect, to resist the kind of soulless imperfection of technology that's built into the software because it's made to look designy. My colleagues always liked the perfection. So for my age group, I was pretty much, and remain, fairly alienated. So my project here was to take this 3D printer, which is made to make industrial design elements, and figure out how to make them look organic. This wasn't so easy because it was made, the technology was made to make smooth parts. At that point, it was resistant to printing what is called irregular polygons. This thing that we're looking at is made from a modeling technique that permits irregularity, and the machines were tooled to make, Sophie and Auriea, you know what I'm talking about, nerves, nice schematic, designy looking shapes. So the first thing I did, I have to tell this as a story. I'm a storyteller, and it's sort of good story about technology. So my task was how to bring irregular polygonal forms to 3D printing. The first thing that happened, this is a story of my life for those who know me for a long time. Sophie was my student at the Art Institute, so she's known me for 10 years, right? So Sophie, I don't know if you know the story, but basically the guy working in the design lab said, you cannot use irregular polygons. It's impossible, and I won't let you do it. And those are fighting words for me. So I did like
That's funny.
Yeah, it is funny. And so me and one of my grad students at that point, I was like, we are going to crack this. So we actually did, by patching together all kinds of crazy tools from all over the place, how to make a seamless mesh that didn't intersect itself, so that the machine could understand the surface, right? It couldn't pretzelize. Pretzelization means it crosses over itself, that the machine doesn't understand that. So we spent 2 months trying to figure this out. We were very proud. We went in to print it, and the guy said, no, you will not use my machine, to do this. And I was like, what? And it's like, your job, I'm a professor here. They bought this software for me. Oh, by the way, to do this, I forced the school to get the guy who was the provost at that point was my buddy. And their thing was, get Claudia whatever she wants so that she can build curriculum around it, which didn't make the shopkeeper very happy. So Sophie is laughing because she like, haha. Yeah, it wasn't funny though. But the guy said, no, you can't do it. And I was like, wait a minute. This machine, we just spent $124,000 on special software to make prosthesis, teeth, organic body parts with a 3D printer, which was $13,000 a seat at that point. So it really added up to that much money. And the guy wouldn't let me use it. So to make a long story short, I went to the dean. He was fired. Sorry about that, guy, and we did this. So my point here was that I was looking at, how do you make this look like rot and decay? It's made out of ABS plastic, which is non-decayable. It's like garbage. It's like sneaker parts and crappy toys that you throw in the garbage and stay in the garbage dump forever. It's a toxin pollutant. And I thought to myself, oh, great, archival. Like, it's what artists, we want things that don't decay. So here was plastic, which has a very low value in the cultural, in aesthetic land, right? It's garbage, it's crap, it's stuff that you can't throw out. And I thought, wow, it's archival. So then I wanted to build a kind of aesthetic that was not based on the sterility of the software. So that was another problem. So a ZBrush is Aurea's a tool of choice. And this was just invented at that point. And it was made to make monster skin. It was made to make, ghouls and zombies. It was basically
bumpy monsters, yeah.
Yeah, it was basically made to make zombie skin. So I was like, oh wow, zombie skin rot. So I took a brush, Auriea, with it, like I made pictures of dirt, like bumps, and I made it into a brush, and I put picture of dirt as the organic sculpting mode, and I did those. And I showed them, I made these little, you can see in the picture there, beautiful handmade walnut pedestal to also soften it and humanize it. And Steve showed them in my first show there. And what happened was, guess what? Nobody bought them because they were made of plastic. And at that point, collectors was like, plastic? Forget it. So they didn't want to buy garbage material. So they didn't, which for me is always meant that I had new sculpture material. So if we go back to the chrome thing, these things were now part of the other pictures, Esmé, where you see the chrome sculpture. So I felt it was successful in that
I need to be made the host.
Oh, or Charlene can do it. Can you go back to the other pic, my dear, where you're sharing screen of your presentation and we see. Also, you're silenced. There you are. Okay, good. So I had all of these things sitting around, and eventually I turned them through a number of years of experimentation to another thing. So in this case, I thought, okay, I'm going to make them into, as plastic was a no-no in the hierarchy of value in the aesthetics of the art world, plastic was bad. I think plastic isn't so bad anymore, but I thought I would use precious metal. Like, so I would go the other way. So at first I made ones, I gilded them. But that looked sort of cheap, like what you do with the process that people do for their baby's shoes. So it had a kind of, it didn't have the patina of the aesthetics of high art. So that's what I did, is that I stained them to antique them. So I took India ink and stained it. And then I made the pedestals out of organic material, which is plastic, cast rubber. So all of the pedestals were unique for the particular objects. So it went through this evolution, and which was a process to somehow push the aesthetic and deny the aesthetic that is preset by corporations who use the software to make industrial objects of some kind, and also to take control over that software, to not be enslaved by these presets, overly determined presets. And that's the end. Yes, Charlene?
Oh yeah, so about like, when we're talking about like post-human embodiment, so is this like a mastery of something inorganic to replicate the organic?
Yes.
Because that's pretty much like, you know, when going beyond our bodies, you know, and I want to also talk to Auriea about this, because we're making these, and also Sophie, we're making these imperfect copies, and it brings up the idea of, you know, can we copy ourselves, or, you know, can we make organic reproductions, and so, and you know, are we reproducible like that? You know, can we just eventually print ourselves? So I want to move to Auriea, because Auriea also uses you know, a printer and your body, and I'm very interested because it's a whole different approach to the body, the figure, copies, and so I would like to, Esmé, can we go move to Aurea's work?
Yeah. There's lots of gray boxes on the screen. Okay, we have some images.
Okay.
Great. Okay, this isn't the one I wanted to start with. I would start with the Cyclops if we could.
Yeah,
there we go. Perfect. Okay, so because I think it's the perfect sort of in between of the things that, I don't know, in a lot of ways the work that we all do kind of go together in a really strange spectrum, you know. It's like between his sort of melting bodies and Cronenberg aesthetic and Claudia's seeking imperfection, and even what you'll hear from Sophie, who is more about presenting people as they are in a weird way, and therefore and finding something else within them, in a sense. I'm doing something else in a way. I'm like using 3D scanning of myself in this case. This is being a Cyclops study, because there is a much larger version of this sculpture. And so the things that are on display in the gallery currently are actually sort of the prototypes that I use as a way, or the things that I output via my 3D printers, like the ones I have in the background here. On the way towards making a larger sculpture that does something completely differently than these prototypes do. What these prototypes do, which is really nice, is that they have a certain perfection, a certain smooth quality that I'm able to achieve in the 3D print, which comes from a long process of sculpting actually in the computer. And I guess my experience with sculpting in the computer is kind of different from Claudia's in that its time has gone on, and indeed you had a very first version of ZBrush and you were trying to use NURBS and all this stuff, and now I'm just like reaping the benefit of all that technology, and like I can just take a ball of virtual clay and make it look however I want with these digital tools, because things have gotten a lot easier in a certain sense to look imperfect. Right. So in some ways, my struggle often is to make a more perfect surface than I'm originally starting with, and you seeking control rather than lack of control in a lot of ways. So my work starts perhaps with a scan of my face. In this case, this particular Cyclops is made up of several different elements, one being a scan of my own head, another being a scan, the torso, coming from a scan of a sculpture here in Rome, where I'm calling from. My studio is in Rome, Italy, and so the torso is from a sculpture, an ancient torso that I found in a museum that was said to be from a Cyclops also. But then I added the breasts to that torso. The legs actually are from a scan of a clay sculpture that I made from life, from a model. I made the clay sculpture, I scanned in the clay, and then took that further in and digitally sculpted it until it became the form that I wanted to see. So my way of working is a lot more like a collage in a funny way, and taking all these disparate images, forms, and putting them together in such a way that they tell the story that I want to tell. And then taking them through a process of sculpting, which is just like sculpting in any analog material in a funny way, until I've made what I came to make, you might say. Rather than post-humanism, which I actually haven't thought that much about, oddly, I guess. But I kind of, my work thematically is more of a pre-humanism, if anything else, in that I'm often dealing with stories, existing mythologies like the Cyclops. And so I would say that, you know, I'm dealing more often than not with ideas of transformation. And, you know, I take this forms of mythology and through these transformations, it's got a lot more to do with, I guess, metamorphosis, like Ovid, than it does with Cronenberg, you know. So to read the prologue to the Ovid's Metamorphosis from my phone, changes of shape, new forms are the theme which my spirit impels me now to recite. Inspire me, O gods, it is you who have even transformed my art, and spin me a thread from the world's beginning down to my own lifetime in one continuous poem. And that's what I try to do. actually, is to take a story or a form that is ancient and to find through sculpture its way into the present, and along the way actually to find myself within it. So that's what this Cyclops is to me. In this particular maquette, is this sort of ideal form of Cyclops, of the story of the Cyclops that I'm trying to tell.
And where do you see, because it's yourself and, you know, many different files from different sculptures. And so it's like, you know, it's this conglomerate, you know, it's this hybrid image. And
Yeah.
but also, like, where do you see yourself in this? Like, and I was thinking of you. I always think of you, and I think of Sanford Biggers and sculpting in Rome, and you know his Chimera series, which kind of reminds me. You know, I'm drawing parallels. You know, the Chimera. You know, he's combining ancient Western and West African forms. You're combining ancient Western forms in yourself and other forms from the games you've created.
Yeah.
And
I say I'm really trying to blur it more. Like, I don't want you to know what my references are. I mean, I told you guys all this, you know, but ultimately, if you saw it, maybe you wouldn't know, you know, that it was like that, you know. It's like I'm always trying to be a little more mysterious, I think.
I read about it.
Yeah.
So you're actually just really creating a new form.
Yeah, but from an existing base. I mean, it's called Cyclops. Usually my titles are like really plain or like very for one thing, I don't know if you put the QR codes in the thing, the QR code for this particular one, for the Cyclops maybe, and then we'll go back to the mysteries. Okay, so here. So if those of you in the audience, if you scan this with your phone, like just take out your phone and like point it at the camera at the QR code, you are taken to a page where you're, in fact, I'm going to do it too, just so that I know what you're going to do. Yeah, you can do it right now. And does it work from the? Wait,
I've got it.
There goes. Okay, so then you're taken to a page where you see the sculpture, a digital version of the sculpture. So quite often, my work, most of the time, has also a digital counterpart to it, a digital double, or the file from which the physical sculpture is born, is another way of thinking of it. And then often I will, if you've done this with your phone, you'll see in the screen that you have an AR, there's a button in the corner that says AR. And if you click on that AR button, then you can sort of pan it, depending on your phone, okay, what your experience will be, but you get the sculpture in your space.
Yes, I just placed a large one.
Yeah, you can make it really large as your own body, or you can scale it down and have like a miniature version. But it can feel quite real. Either way, you know, and a lot of times I'm doing this because I was born on the net, I guess. And I know that people are never going to see my sculpture in person, you know. And yet I want them to have a certain experience of that, a physical experience of that. Now, if you give over your sense of disbelief to the illusion that this thing is here, you can start to feel like it's actually there in this space with you. And you actually, at a certain point, can start to feel your relationship, your body's relationship to that digital sculpture, in much the same way that you feel it as being in when you're in presence of an actual sculpture, to the point where I've had some people say, oh, I felt like when I took my phone away that it should still be there. You know, it's like also this kind of illusion, this echo of something real being in the presence of something physical, is something that I'm always like playing with in my sculpture. So right now, I would say those of you who have tried this illusion, who are messing around with the AR, projecting it onto your table, you are getting the true experience of the sculpture as well. I don't consider one to be less real than the other. And in some ways, the digital version is more real to me than the physical copy. So that's why I end up like always kind of doing these types of hybrids in this way as well. So it's not just the sculpture that's a hybrid, but the presentation of the object that's also a hybrid. Briefly, maybe I'll go back and talk about some of the mysteries. We could start with which one? This one? No, the other one. The simpler one. This one. Okay. This one, the mysteries are a series of sculptures that I'm doing. And I'm up to number 5 now. This is version 3. In the show, we also have version 4, 3, 4, 3 and 4. Mystery version 3. It's because they started quite simply as 2 objects that I had in my studio, a skull and a flower that I made a 3D scan of at a certain point, like in 2016 or something. And I was kind of intrigued by this 3D scan. And I kept coming back to it. And then whenever I can't stop coming back to a certain set of forms, I know that they're going to turn into something. And eventually, in version 1 was the scan itself. Version 2 was where I had started turning the skull scan into something more abstract, to the point where in version 3, the skull itself is almost unrecognizable. You only have this sort of icon almost of what a skull looks like and an icon of what a flower is. I had placed this face inside the eye of the skull at a certain point, which is not my face. It's just a face that I sculpted in this case. In version 5, which I actually have behind me, I did use the scan of my face, but in version 3, I hadn't gotten to that yet. And I kept messing around with the stem of the flower until it started looking more and more like a bone, and so it sort of started speaking to me in a different way. This is more in a sort of expressive, I guess, way of going about sculpture, one where I don't have a specific story in mind when I'm doing it, and I'm just trying to tease out meaning from the forms, I suppose, to the point where when you go to the other version 4, which is in the first slide there, yeah, this one is the next evolution of that, where I was just, somehow these are like exercises. The mysteries are like exercises. They're like me messing around with digital sculpture and trying to find pleasure, I suppose, in the forms. And at the same time, it's like my general attraction to the sort of art historical format of the memento mori, or the vanitas. In this case, I've got this strand of hair, sort of like this vanity, as well as turning what was a tulip flower into something that's more a full-blown rose in this particular sculpture. Unfortunately, there's no digital version of this one in the exhibition, because I haven't made a digital version of this particular one. I plan on it. But if we go to the QR code for some of the mysteries, I hope hopefully those are in the mix here.
The digital version for version 3 is just amazing. And let's go to that QR code. We're going to have
that would be great.
We're going to run out of time, but I definitely want people to see this. Do we have the QR code to version 3?
No, we only have the Cyclops. Oh, really? Oh, yeah, that's too bad. Okay. Yeah, because version 3 rather, the digital version is one that I translated into very much looking like it's covered in blood, and it's made of blood and bone, and then the flower is made of bronze, and it is present in the gallery. And it sort of gives you this, again, this, I guess, what was spoken of before about body horror. It kind of gives you this feeling, or a feeling of tragedy, so I would say that with these sculptures, I'm going for this kind of I don't know, singular emotions or reactions, emotional reactions to their materiality. Another one, the digital version of Mystery One, which is made out of this very silver, sleek material, which is sort of speaking to this, even though it's a skull and a flower, it's sort of speaking to this like technological perfection. And it's presented in this like pink environment that's very like liquid. And so I think that I'm always playing with this, these interstitial like feelings between like something that's real and something that's virtual, and trying to always question between the two by making the virtual feel real and the real feel a bit fake and mysterious. So yeah, that's what's up. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, it's like, but I like how you're crossing the boundaries of past and future and organic and it's like there are permeable boundaries everywhere. But I do see something post-human about it, even though you are drawing from the past.
Yeah.
That a lot of these, are not generated from something organic, but there's something about, just the ability to copy oneself.
Yeah.
Just the process itself, where we can just where it's going to become even easier just to copy parts of us.
Right.
Or maybe it's just as Auriea was saying in the beginning, we've adapted to a life where you can endlessly copy yourself with media and the land of the selfie. And we don't think it's alienating in the way that Cronenberg posited it as a kind of horror story. We just think it's nature. It's natural.
Well, also with the, I think cloning, everybody was really, we're accepting cloning. Like it's becoming acceptable, where it was something that was very scary, and it still has a lot of ethics issues. But I think we're practicing this in art, where we're going to have to eventually, where it's like there's a parallel with the art and the science.
Well, I think it's just a continuation of this, this figurative sculpture, really. I mean, it's great. I want to hear from Sophie, because about like her version of figurative sculpture, actually, because it's just, I think that's what this is really. It's like especially in this lockdown, I was scanning other people, I was doing models, and then it's like in lockdown, I'm just like, well, I too have a body. It's like I'll just scan myself, right?
Same, but I was so sick of scanning myself.
Well, yeah, let's move to Sophie.
All right. I dropped a lot of slides into the talk, and I want to like zip through them really quick. So maybe it would be faster if I actually shared my version, if you don't mind giving me a screen share permission.
Esmé? Oh, I guess I could do it.
All right.
Okay, you're the host now, Sophie.
Okay, thank you. All right, so if everybody is seeing, are you guys seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, from current slide. Okay, so yeah, I'll be fast. I work with a 3D laser scanner. It was actually really interesting to hear Phillip talking about disability informing his work, because part of the reason that I moved from my original training in photography into 3D is that I developed chronic fatigue syndrome, and I was very disabled for several years, and I couldn't operate my camera anymore. So the 3D scanning became a real bridge from making photographic imagery into, what felt like virtual photography, and then ultimately sculpture. So a lot of my practice, exactly as Auriea said, was really kind of hampered by the pandemic, because I was very used to working with models. I was making large scale figurative work. It's always based on a real body. So this is my piece that's in the show, and the errors and all these kind of blind spots and elisions that you see in this work are all scanner error. So I'm actually intentionally misusing a scanner, but the scanner that I have was really not developed to scan the human body to begin with. And so I'm kind of using it against the grain, and I'm trying to expose some of the flaws and, you know, the flawed assumptions in the design of this piece of technology. And I'm really interested in this question of what do we lose when our bodies are digitized and copied and kind of sent across the spaces of the internet. I'm going to give an incredibly, just a little potted, like a recap of my sculptural practice. This is actually how this work started out. It's quite an old piece that I reworked. Similarly, again, you know, COVID, no funding, no studio, no childcare. I was kind of digging through my archive and reworking old pieces. And so it started out as a series that was called Artifact, and it was all scans of my own body that was supposed to resemble damaged classical sculptures. But then as you got closer, you saw they were plastic, and you saw it had this kind of sense of like a fake or a forgery. You saw that the damage wasn't actually wrought by, you know, time or like water, history, anything like that. The damage that had occurred to these fragmented things was digital. But over time, I've been trying to restore a little bit of what the scanner strips away. So there's always a balance in my work. Like for a long time, my work had no skin tone, it had no movement. I was really interested in the way that the scanner kind of kills the body and strips everything off. And as time goes on, I've been trying to restore some of the humanity, particularly the color, the kind of image textures. This is one early piece that I did that did incorporate an actual photograph of the model. And also with this kind of archaeological damage, and I've sanded it too. I've actually sandblasted this work because I want it to look like a kind of a polychrome work that's been excavated and it's had damage happen to it. But a lot of the time, and this is work from the same area that Claudia is talking about, when the market really wasn't very accepting of plastic, I would cast things. This is a bronze cast because it feels reassuringly heavy and expensive. So I had made a lot of larger work that was actually incorporating a lot of the language of 3D printing too, and some of the language of 3D. I was making work that was based on particular medical histories, and again, given my interest in kind of in disability in the female identified body, these works were about hysteria and the way that technology kind of failed to codify madness and attempted to capture it. And these are made on a nylon laser printer. They're made in SLS material. And one of my largest pieces, the one that was in the Bitform show, was actually printed in about 50 parts. And then we had to put it together. It's just like the world's worst jigsaw puzzle. But by that point, it became really important for me to play with the materials and again, to kind of try to strip away some of that machine perfection that, again, Claudia was talking about earlier. So I started painting them, and I actually wanted the bodies here to look like wood and concrete. So I didn't want them to look digitally made at all. And mostly when people walked into my studio and saw it, they'd say, oh, is that plywood? You know, is that cast stone? They did not tweet that it was a piece of plastic. So that's from this. This was the last series. This was shown at C24 in New York a couple of years ago. And during the past couple of years, well, the past 18 months, I guess, I've had to pivot to making digital work. And it's actually been really incredibly liberating. And I think a lot about what Auriea was talking about too, with the which is more real, you know, the 3D file or the sculpture. And I always, before this year, I'd had a sense that it had to be the sculpture, you know, it had to be encountered. And I was always say to my students, like, it's not enough to just say this is going to be shown on a screen. I need you to think about what that screen is, what size it is, how somebody encounters it in a gallery. I was never making work to be seen kind of at home, you know, on a monitor. But this was my latest show, which is a VR show called Dematerialized, and it's still accessible through my website if anyone wants to visit, and I recommend seeing it through a headset. And so for the first time, these sculptures felt finished on their own for me. And they were virtual sculptures and kind of presented as such. Most recently, this is another augmented reality piece, which I don't have a QR code for, but you can see on Feral File in our exhibition called In the Bardo. And it's meant to be a kind of digital ghost that's hovering between, you know, existence and non-existence. And for some of my newer work, I'm actually really explicitly returning a lot more kind of signifiers of identity to the bodies that I'm scanning. So this is my latest project, again, about female identified people who have gone through various physical transformations. This is, I want to tell the whole story of this piece because it's such a fantastic story. I'll just say that this model approached me after a preventative mastectomy, before and after, and is actually a performance artist who had me 3D scan her breasts, and then after the surgery, she would perform with a 3D printed version of them that were bronzed on stage. Was really, really phenomenal. It was kind of about like loss and absence, and the whole project, that was her idea. But then I reached out again after this experience and created this work with consent. And so this project has all been much more explicitly portrait based, and it's been about dialogue with the models and about that interaction that happened in the studio. And that was on hold for a long time. I now really want to pick it up now that I can. Yeah, that kind of brings me up to where I am at the moment. So thank you. Here I can stop sharing.
Well, I love the one about this, this story about the one who, had a mastectomy, and you were able to preserve something that, she was afraid of losing, or that she wanted to go, or at least be able to, and I think the point of the show is just looking at, studying how we relate to our body and how extensions of the body, and how where we're going to go beyond it, and just a meditation on, because I think we're at this point where with Catherine Hill saying embodiment doesn't always take the body, doesn't always require a body. But also it requires us to look back at our bodies and what our relationship with that is. And disability makes us really, look at our relationship with our bodies. Those physical disabilities, that's when, we first experience, we feel like our bodies are betraying us. We have to make modifications. And these are all great opportunities. And when you look at, the concept of the cyborg, it's all like these opportunities for liberation, from these bodies that may be betraying us, or from, certain roles. I mean, but that's a whole conversation I could do another hour on. But
don't you think there's an interesting relation between these artists who are dealing with and the selfie? So I think we've just come to the end of the era of the selfie, which was about the perfecting of the imperfect body as a kind of brand, in order to market yourself. I think I think it's already falling off, because at this point, post what we've endured, what we've experienced as a culture, it's sort of gross. But I think what's interesting about these artists, not me, because I've never done me, but is the opposite. It's about the imperfecting or naturalizing the technology. And even though they use their cells are incidental within that process, because it's not about constructing a brand, but rather about deconstructing a technology somehow.
And well, this technology, the whole thing about technology being scary, and what makes it more palatable, and what is humanizing it, is softening the edges. And like if you look at old like robot films, and they're like all metal and clanging, and they're terrifying. And then, these models get softened, and start to look like us. Or or purposely not to look like us, because then that started getting scary as well, where I think the Japanese are making sure that they're only 5 feet tall, you know, so they can't, you know, so we don't feel like we'll get overpowered. But yeah, this I think we're all getting into something about I think we're all embracing our imperfections. I think we all got out of like the whole body thing, you know, after after 18 months of being on our couches. And Auriea, I just the Cyclops really, as every time I look at it, it kind of calls to mind what's happening to my body, which is aging and things just coming down. And how I read, and that's the response I get when I see your sculpture. It just looks like what I feel is happening to me. That, you know, everything.
Yeah, it's a self-portrait. No, but it's also, you know, meant to be a power figure, and perhaps not in this small version, which, as I said, was sort of a perfect run of something that is actually like almost a yard tall, and like, you know, the final sculpture, which is almost monstrous in the way that I've materialized it, you know, something way more about ritual decay or ritual use, let's say, not even decay, ritual use of an object, you know, in this other version of it, which I should have put a picture in the slide, but I do agree that, like, when I was making this, you know, very pure form of it, the one that's in the show, it's you know, she's sagging, she looks like, or they rather, because they have in the final version both male and female sex, the breasts, which are added to a torso that was originally male, like, you know, it's always playing with these sort of in between gender, in between humanity and monstrosity in some ways also, but more not to tell a negative tale about aging or gender or anything, but more just using all of that to show that that's the power of the figure. You know, that's the power of the body, is that it ages and that it is imperfect, you know. And perhaps this small version doesn't get that power across. It needs that the other materials. I mean, there's something to be said about all of us and the materials that we've chosen. You know, the silicone that is used in the first pieces that we saw, and like, you know, the difference between plastic and something precious metal, and then Sophie's you know, nylon, I suppose, you know, SLS material, and like, you know, and me using resin. You know, there's this thing about like what is what materials you use to display the body also, and like, and these small pieces, I'm just using the pure resin that comes out of my printer, but like, to me, the digital versions, which are often made out of, you know, precious metals and jewels and, you know, marbles from all over the empire or whatever, you know, it's like, to me, that also makes a statement, the choice to make the digital versions, or in the case of version 3, where it's made out of actual bones and, you know, blood and stuff. It's like, this is, you know, saying something else about it. These material narratives, I think, are extremely important, and I'm wondering, I don't know, actually, like, how that's important to those others of you, like Philip, you mentioned this also, like, you know, the materials that you use and the importance of them, or getting away from a certain type of material.
Philip?
Yeah, I could talk. Thing in Maya, you know, like a 3D modeling soft, like I don't really do scanning or anything. I just sort of create from there. So because it's a lot of these things start their life just purely fantastically from my own, you know, I mean, they don't have a necessarily like concrete root that I'm drawing from. Maybe that's not true, but anyway, they're made in a 3D application. in the transferring process, like lately I've been making a lot of armor and I design it in Maya on my computer. And then what I'm doing is actually flattening those out and starting to, cut metal sheets and, drawing from that. And so there is that sort of translation with material that's always sort of interesting. And, I haven't actually thought too much about this, but maybe it's because its genesis has started with, since everything starts as a cube, I don't want it to necessarily, be a direct one-to-one transference there. But I'm not sure. I would have to interrogate that a little bit more. But yeah, I think, you're right. There's with, each of us, there's some sort of, there's a concrete decision being made in the specifics of that material. And silicones are interesting to me just because they are fleshy and bodily like and can be sort of like, I work with this one material, EcoFlex, a lot, which is sort of the stretchiest, sort of grossest one, and it's almost like Stretch Armstrong where you can pull it apart, and as like there's something like just with that material, like I can just sit in my studio and just like stretch that stuff forever, and it's almost soothing to me. So like there's like that sort of physical connection to it. Yeah.
Doesn't it have to do with alchemy also? Because I think what this work has in common, as opposed to self-use, is about accepting death, but there is still this wish, like that you are creating, you're entering this magic alchemical space where it's beyond death. But to do this, there is this sort of magic thing that happens. So you're turning base materials into, right, gold, or
Yeah,
plastic into flesh, or, right?
That's the impression I get from your sculpture, actually. It's like you're trying to turn this plastic object into something, indeed, that's covered in a metal, but maybe it's on its way to becoming fully.
Well, that was why, like, I wasn't completely upset when it broke, because I thought, oh, a mistake. Mistakes are good, right? That it has like the random chaos, the beauty of the imperfection. And that's why I said to Charlene, no, I can put gold in there. And she said, oh, like the Japanese pottery tradition.
Kintsugi, kintsugi.
Right, where it's all about the beautiful Miss Flaw.
Right.
And yeah.
But yeah, but I love this embracing imperfections, because that is, I think, what makes us human. Like, we can't just like make perfect copies.
Right.
In order to reproduce something that is authentic, something that is authentic, it needs that. It needs imperfections, and we, humans, and we know from all of you that are doing like the 3D printing that machines make mistakes. Like, we're not going to be able to make a perfect copy. Mm-hmm. But and I'm thinking about the selfie thing, Claudia. Yeah, I think I'm not as much into looking perfect. I don't think anyone is, because I think we all just.
I think we went through this thing, and the selfie thing was about making an artificially perfect product. And I think we all felt death and how close it is. And we all felt the need for some kind of human, real contact. And it's sort of the idea to make a perfect selfie product is somehow not what humans need right now.
Yeah.
Oh, and there is a feeling of authenticity with, even though we're talking about these materials, but there is something authentic about like the negative spaces in Sophie's work, or just a meditation on the soul, as currency with Phillips, or just the merging of like the human and the mythological and the past and the present,
The physical.
with Aurea's. and just like, and the many things that I mean, well, now like Kryptonite Mortification now has like a total like story, you know, it has been through a lot. And I think if we don't have questions from the audience, we need to wrap this up. But I want to thank everybody for sharing their work and their practice. It was very interesting because everybody's working with, you know, really with like different materials and you know, just I picked 4 incredible artists, and I'm really grateful that you guys that you're part of the show and that you're here today.
Well,
thank you.
yeah, thank you. But you also picked, it's very nice to meet you, Phillip. And you're a little at a disadvantage because you picked 4 artists, but we already were friends because we feel this connection in terms of what we're doing. So you were right. You chose correctly.
And I'm looking, I don't see any questions yet.
I sort of have to go anyway,
Okay.
but I have to go meet Sophie, in fact.
Yeah, I'll see you soon.
So I think we can
I'm jealous you guys get to meet each other.
Yeah.
everybody. I'm glad you guys got to meet. I think a lot of people hadn't met Phillip, and I want to thank everybody. And let you know the gallery is open Wednesday through Sunday from 1 to 5 and by appointment. Please get in touch with me if you need to find another time. And it is open till the show is open through July 3rd. And yeah, please come and see me in the gallery. And thank you for joining us for this talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.